All right. I'm driving, right?
You are.
All right.
Which
everybody on
everyone
the bus.
buckle up.
For better or
for
worse.
real.
Sit in the back and get quiet.
Keep your feet out of the aisle.
All right. Today we are talking about, you guessed it, power active modern content types for business. Yeah,
This is what happens
types.
when Mike's not around for the planning meetings. So.
Content types just didn't sound exciting enough. So we had
to put all the buzzwords.
Yeah, start prefixes and suffixes, and it just got funnier and funnier the more we did it.
But in actual fact, the reason we wanted to talk about it is there has been some change, right? Content types have become slightly different things. They've been improved and they are new and they come in a really nice new package.
Yeah.
So.
And as often the case, all three of us learned something about this topic as we were preparing for this talk. So
yes, we did. This is interesting.
We learned that Julie has now nothing to say.
This is interesting. This slide doesn't show the pictures. Anyway, we're all here, and three people are in Las Vegas. People on the bottom of the slide that you could see. So we're going to talk.
I can see the slide.
Yeah, I can see the slides, but do you see people's faces on this slide?
Yeah. Yep.
Huh, I don't. I see
Turn
white
the light
spaces.
on, Anderson.
I got to turn it.
Light
on. We are going to give a little overview of content types and why they're so cool and why they are the best thing since sliced bread. We're going to talk about the new content type gallery, which is different than the old content type hub gallery sort of thing. We're going to talk about site templates a little bit. Todd's got to, of course, talk a little bit about some PowerShell, and Todd will be putting in some dad jokes.
That would just be a nuisance.
I may slip in a dad joke. Julie may slip in a dad joke. You never know.
Could happen.
Mike's out somewhere. He may actually be sliding in a dad joke. So, why do content types matter? These are slides I've been using for so long that they're probably from PowerPoint 95 or something. But basically, a content type is what I think of as a business object. It's a thing that you move around in your organization, whether it's document-based or not. It's things like what's in those boxes on the bottom, invoices, contracts, anything that you want to store as an object in a list or library in SharePoint. It uses a content type. And everything that we create inherits from an existing content type that we use as a starting point. So for example, we might create a contract that inherits from document. And we might add a couple of pieces of metadata to contract, like the contract date, contract amount, the contract owner. Things, any metadata that actually matters to sort of define the thing, that business object for us as an organization. Everybody's going to have slightly different metadata because they think about even a contract a little bit differently based on what they want to do with it in their organization. So you inherit from an existing content type. You either just give it a name, or you give it a name and you add a couple of extra columns, and then you can build some inheritance from that as well. So you could have different kinds of contracts, for example. And then the reason you do this, in my mind, primarily is so that you can start answering questions like these. How many proposals did we lose in the last month? How much revenue are we generating for each type of contract? If you've just got a big document library and you're dumping content in it, you can't even tell which documents are contracts unless you follow some sort of naming convention, or you drop them into a particular folder or something like that. But you wouldn't have that metadata that would help you answer questions like this unless you set up content types with good metadata columns. So that was the abbreviated version of why I think content types are the coolest thing since sliced bread. Any thoughts?
So I want to say, so I'm less of a data guy and more of an admin guy. The thing that really made content types make sense for me, and this will make everybody shudder, is I think of them as document templates. So kind of like, in the old days with Word, you had an invoice template and it had all the fields that you had to fill out, and it was easy to tell all the ones that were based off that same template. That's sort of like when I'm trying to get people to start to understand content types. If they're not getting it, I start with that. They are so much more than that, but that was kind of how they started making sense to me.
Yep, that's another thing that we can do is we can provide a template. So for example, if we had a template that we would use with all of our vendors, and we would want every contract to start with that, we can upload a template that sits with that contract content type, and that's pretty cool. I don't see people using that as much as a lot of the other things, but it's certainly a nice ability when you do use it. So in the old days, or still it's still there. This is what the content type gallery looked like in its classic sense, and that's really tiny. But I've defined a contract content type in that screenshot. Now we have this modern content type gallery, and the big difference in the modern content type gallery isn't just the UI, though there's certainly that. It's that we've moved from a push idea to a pull idea. And so instead of having every content type that we create in the content type hub being syndicated out to every single site in the entire tenant, where we request content types from the sites where we want to use them from the content type gallery. When we make changes to a content type in that content type gallery for up to an hour, we might see this message in one of the sites that uses this content type. Julie and Todd and I were discussing this on Monday, and I was very wrong about how all of this worked. There was a great call yesterday. The community, what's that call called?
It was, we have a reference in the references where I linked directly to the community call where it's actually, like where they start discussing it, but it was the Microsoft 365 platform community call, which is bi-weekly on Tuesdays.
Right.
That one's Microsoft only. Sorry.
Yes. So say I've created this contract content type in the content type hub, effectively through the admin pages, and I decide, well, I'm going to add an expiration date. Well, I can add that. I can publish it in the content type gallery, and it will be available to all of the sites that are using that contract content type. But it might take a little while before that change proliferates through the sites where you have it. And while that's going on, you might see this updates are available for this content type, the yellow bar, and you might not see the change because that it hasn't proliferated yet. It can take up to an hour for changes that you've made centrally to hit the sites where it's in use. Content types will only be updated if they are actually used in a list or a library. So for example, if you created a contract content type, 5 years ago, and it's been syndicated to every site that existed in your tenant at the time, if it's not in use in a list or library, it will never be updated based on updates you make in the content type gallery. So that helps that engine be a bit more efficient.
So in our defense, though, this is a recent fix. Like it wasn't working that way until very recently, and then William, or I guess you go by Bill, is saying, so the old distribution system has now been deprecated. In online, yes. Of course, if you're still running on-prem, it's going to work the old way with the timer job. Although maybe not as big.
It's been deprecated, but it sort of also hasn't, because if you're using content types across your sites and you want to make sure that you can centrally manage them, so you're using the content type hub, that dependence will still be there. It'll still work. It'll still do the same thing that you want. The difference is that all of the custom content types that you've created in the content type hub won't automatically show up in every site. You request to add them instead.
Yeah, and so Mark talked about the meeting that we were all on yesterday, and we were talking about this, and Mark was arguing, though not arguing, about how this didn't work correctly, and the people from Microsoft were, yes, it was, it takes an hour, and we're like, well, read that message. Updates are available there's an update button. Like, how about that? Are we supposed to know that that's going to come out if we're just patient? Like nothing suggests that. And so like Julie said, this is kind of new. And so it was good feedback for the Microsoft folks because they knew what it meant. They knew that it replicated in the background, but none of us did. And so this is one of those things where we went and tested it in the background and it all worked. This was kind of frustrating for all of us.
I think it's been a communication problem, right? I mean, they've made some significant changes in the way content type syndication works, and they've said it was gonna happen, but they haven't really communicated very well what happened and when and how it works. So the fact that it can take up to an hour is not something that's in any of the documentation, for example.
So Russell's asking, how can we tell? And I'm only chuckling because this was part of the big conversation on Monday, is how can we tell where content types are used? And unless you guys heard something I didn't, I think we're still in the same boat, which is that by either PowerShell or some higher level of code, you need to go look. You effectively need to index all your sites and see what content types are being used in that.
It also came up on the call yesterday, though, and they agreed. The Microsoft folks agreed that that's something that they need, and I think they said they're thinking about it or working on it.
Yeah, that was after we figured out the whole replication thing. We're like, oh, by the way, since you solved that one, we've got this other complaint about how you can't tell they're using. Like, yeah, you're screwed. There's no way to do that. Like, oh.
So as of now, you have to go look. Hopefully, they'll fix it.
I think if ShareGate can do it, you would build a custom report to find instances of a content type. So essentially, you'd be doing the same thing that you do with PowerShell or code. I don't think that there's an out of the box report, but yes, ShareGate certainly helps.
As of today, there is not.
That. Yeah,
sounds like a job for Todd and PowerShell. I need to write the.
So anyway, I think the story is generally good news. The fact that information architecture, I think for the community for quite some time thought that Microsoft was saying, well, we don't need information architecture anymore. We don't need to structure our content. AI and search is going to magically find everything we ever need without us doing anything.
Right, and before we look for it, it'll just pop up.
Yeah, and I was just never believing that. And I think that there have been huge changes and improvements in AI and search and all that sort of stuff that actually does make it more likely you're going to find something when you need it. But it doesn't give you the ability to create these custom experiences based on what kind of content you have in your organization and what you actually need to know. That's still going to be up to you.
I would want to maybe make the comment, and I suppose you could debate this, but I suspect you're going to agree with me, is that I think you should, even if you are not theoretically mature enough to need and utilize content types today, I think you can never go wrong by creating a content type because you may want it later. And being able to index and or find content by a type will always potentially save you down the road if you started that way. So I think there's a mental model here where even if you're at the 100 level of maturity, it is best if you are deciding that this corpus of content, even if it's in one library today or one list today, should have a content type to it because you may want it later. And that, I mean, I think that would be a good way to think about it.
Absolutely. Retrofitting content types into an existing list or library that's got a lot of content in it is harder than starting with the content type in the beginning. So
can you
like
do
you
that?
said, you can't really go wrong by you can go wrong, but you're less likely to go wrong by creating content types up front.
So Sorry, can I assign, if I've got a Word document that's just using the regular document content type out of the box, and then I come to Jesus on this and make a content type, can I assign my existing documents to the new content type?
Sure. If you do that through the UI, then you've modified the document, so you've touched it, which may or may not be what you want to do. ShareGate is great for that. You can export the metadata, update the metadata in a spreadsheet, and and sort of batch update all of the, I just have a document, a library with documents, and I decide they should all be contracts with expiration dates. I can bulk edit by exporting that content into a spreadsheet, fill in the metadata, and then import it back in, which is a lot easier, I think, than using even the grid view.
Yeah, and you can do it. I mean, Todd knows this, but you can do it using PowerShell and do the system update versus the regular update, and that will update the content type without modifying, changing the modified by or date.
Yeah, you'll find though that if you ask people to put in metadata as they upload something, they'll bitch and moan about it, and they won't want to do it, and they'll try to avoid it. But it's far easier than if you say, "Oh, you got 1,000 of those. Please fill in all the effective dates," because then they really won't want to do it. Right. You have to retrofit mechanically. So you got to run PowerShell or ShareGate or something in order to get the structure changed, and you've got to get somebody to fill in that data. So it's a big lift instead of a small lift.
Yeah. And do you cover the required column in a later slide? I can't remember.
I don't.
So that's a good discussion. So the expiration date on this one, you'll notice that in the screenshot, Mark has wisely not required the expiration date, even though one could make a strong argument that a contract should have an expiration date. And I'm not doing this to make fun of Mark, but that is something you get when you start getting down this path. You're like, oh, this is great. We're gonna make everybody put all the information in, then we'll never have to go back. As a user, the more required fields anything requires, the less likely I'm going to fill it out, or the less likely I'm going to put valid data in, because I'll just get fatigued. So certainly take advantage of the required fields, but be judicious about it, because you can.
And also know that in SharePoint, required field is a recommendation. There's nothing that keeps you. There are a couple of places in the UI where you actually can't save the thing if you don't put in a value. But for the most part, you're able to, especially because you can just upload a document and put in no metadata. But then you have the items needing attention view, which is a very handy one for backfilling metadata.
Yeah.
All right. So the other thing we wanted to touch on is site templates. So how do content types fit into site templates? I use site templates a lot. Almost as building blocks, not necessarily as a template for a whole site, but as a template for, like, I want to create a policy library, or I want to create a contract library in a site. I might build those as separate site templates and then apply them both to the sites that need them. So in the settings for a site, you have this option to apply a site template, and by default you get all of these really colorful, complicated, oddly built templates from Microsoft. I'm not a fan. I think that they're sort of like the Fab 40. They all do things in very different ways. I don't think any of them use content types in an intelligent way. So in many cases, you're in my belief, you're better off building your own lists and libraries using using a content type and some metadata fields that actually make sense to you. Though these things can certainly give people a leg up if they need something. I need crisis management. I need exactly that. The place where we can start to customize things is in this from your organization tab. And what we can do is we can set up our own templates, and by default you get this weird picture of a cat. Why a cat has anything to do with templates?
Cats love content types.
That's what you get if you
they
go
hate water,
image,
love content types.
Yeah, so lots of cats. So this is an example of a site template that builds a policies library. So in this case, I'm taking the option where I'm actually building the content type in the site template, but I'm using the same GUID or internal identifier that I use in every other site. So it's the same thing across all sites. I'm not using the content type hub. So I create a couple of site columns. I create the content type called policy. I add a couple more columns to that content type, I create the columns, I create the content type, I add the columns to the content type. I create a library called policies. I apply that content type to it, et cetera, et cetera. And now I've got a library called policies with the policy content type applied to it. Everything's hunky and dory. And I could apply that policy site template to any sites where I want to be able to store policies. So for example, Policies Center is something that we build in just about every intranet we build these days. And the departments that actually have policies get a policies library, and we can pull it together into one place because they're all using a content type.
The same content type.
The same content type.
Yeah.
So there are two ways to do this. I'm actually going to go to the second way first. So this is what I did in that screenshot that I just ran through. In the site script that creates the policies library, I'm creating the content type in that site template. But like I said, I'm giving it an ID that is consistent, right? So it's usually what we'll do is we'll build a site and use it as sort of the template or the starting point or the prototypical one. You know, it's n equals 1, and we'll export the setup for the content types and libraries and stuff. And that's where this GUID comes from. So you could certainly look at it if you look at the settings for the list or library as well. And so by using this consistent ID and applying that ID to every place that you run this site template, you're actually getting something that SharePoint, again, thinks of as the same thing. And that's really important because a policy needs to be a policy everywhere. The other option that you have, and this was a verb that showed up in the site template schema about a month or two ago, I think. And in PowerShell, and became available in someplace else.
The graph APIs
right.
have add content type.
Yep. So we can add a content type from the hub instead. So we can say, well, I've already defined this thing. It's already in the content type hub. And so I want to include it in this particular site. It's a bummer because you have to use the GUID and you can't see the name. And then later when you actually add it to the list, you have to use the name, not the GUID. So it's like, but
thanks, Microsoft.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, that's the only downside to it. But the nice thing is here you can say, all right, I'm going to pull this thing from the content type hub, and then I'm going to add it to a list. If I make changes to this down the road, I don't have to reapply the template. I would have to reapply the template in this case. And I've been doing this for a couple of years now because the content type hub didn't do things the way we wanted them to. But I think that with the addition of this verb, we're actually in much better shape. We can apply this. Sorry, go ahead.
And faith that it will actually get replicated without somebody having to go hit that update button.
Yeah, which we didn't believe on Monday, but now we're absolutely
felt very strongly on Monday.
Converted.
No such thing as
this is an example of us being lifelong learners, right? We cannot know something on Monday. I do think the communication around this has been horrible. So
you all should have heard us on Monday yelling that was just, why hasn't Microsoft done this?
These people are idiots.
And then on Tuesday.
Oh, yeah. So Steve, it's not the same if you use the same GUID in a sense, because so say I do it this way. I'm using a consistent GUID. I'm creating the content type in each site where I want it. So you know, if you wanted to use search to find content types or all the content that has that content type works totally the same. But if I want to make a change to that content type, I have to update this site script, update the site template that site script is used in or templates, and then reapply that site template to make this change. By using this verb instead and add content type from hub, I'm pulling the definition from the hub instead. And this is the thing that you couldn't do in a site template until a month or two ago. And that way you've created that connection to the hub, and you never have to apply the template again to get those changes to happen. Does that help? As you say,
He says he got it.
Yeah, I got it. Well, he's got it, or at least I said a bunch of things and he heard them.
He's tired of listening to you talk.
So we have some nice tools here, right? You can centrally manage content types. That becomes an exercise into itself. You get into all kinds of discussions about, well, I think of a policy like this, and you think of a policy like that. That exercise itself is really important, getting people to think of their business objects as the same thing, but it can be a real exercise. So sometimes doing the site template approach where you're building the site, building the content type in the places that you need to build it might actually be politically easier, but it might cause you more work down the road to reapply changes.
Have you gone in and checked that the content type ID, when you add it from the hub in the site, has the same ID still? Because when you add it to a list and library, and this was true even when they were in the content type hub, when you add the content type to a list or library, it gets an additional GUID. So it's like the content type ID plus an additional GUID is the content type ID of that content type in a list or library. What I am asking, and it's more to address what Russell is asking, is do you know if now with this add a content type from the hub verb, does the content type ID in the site level, is it the same or different?
In the site level, you will get exactly this. When you apply it to a list or a library, it becomes a list or library content type, and it gets another chunk of ID. So that's why when we do search things, we might say something like, show me everything that's got this GUID star, because you might have 5 libraries, and each one of those instances of that, each place you've used that content type from the site level, it gets a different GUID.
Right. So to just backtrack just a tiny bit to sort of take Steve's question and Russell's question and sort of merge them together. When we were adding the content types manually to the sites and using the same ID, that is similar to the content type hub doing that because the IDs will be the same. However, you don't get that update. So it's way better to use this verb now that we know that it's going to update any changes from the content type hub, instead of us manually having to go back and update the site script and update the template and reapply it manually ourselves and or with code ourselves.
There are use cases for both. I mean, I think the nice thing is we have the option. So, these, I keep saying GUID, but they're really not GUIDs. So
yeah, I'm saying that too. It's actually a GUID with a hex at the front, and it's got the dashes taken out.
But each section is significant. Like OX01 means that it's inherited from the document content type.
Yeah, but after that, they're GUIDs without the dash taken out.
Right.
Yeah.
But they don't get full GUIDs every time. They're like little GUIDlets that get added within a site. So anyway, you get uniqueness where you want uniqueness, and you get similarity where you want similarity. It's actually a really nice system, and it's one of the things that Microsoft, I think, got exactly right back in, what was it, SharePoint 2007 when these things showed up. And yeah, that concept has been really good ever since.
Give me a minute to talk about PowerShell.
Oh, geez. All right. I'm running PowerShell to get the blue stuff. You know that.
They don't know that. So lots of options with PowerShell. The stuff that Mark was just showing was the site script, site design / template bit. So those don't show up on here. But you do have a couple things I wanted to call out were you do have programmatic ways to add a content type from the content type hub. That's the second one from the top there. And then, so that adds it to the site. So with that one, you give, a content type to a specific site, and then you have to add it to the list after that. So there's another one, a couple down from there. And then that add command also does the refresh or the update. So we talked about how if you wait an hour, it should happen automatically, but gosh darn it, if you need that new content type right now, you're just so darned excited to start filling out expiration dates, you can use that add, and that will kick the refresh.
And you have the similar graph endpoint that does the same thing.
Yep. And so also, good.
There are a couple other commandlets that you don't have on this list that are important, and I don't think they're in any of the slides, like get P&P site script from list. That takes the definitions of those content types that are applied to that list and exports them to the JSON that I was showing. Sorry.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's So that was the stuff, the site script stuff. So yeah, there's a few things in there. The replication parameters, I haven't looked at that to see what things you can tweak. But yeah, don't forget about PowerShell. That's it. That's all I needed.
PowerShell, good. Resources here, they're all clickable because we're presenting from Teams. The one that the second to the bottom is what's changed in content type publishing. That article has been squirreled away in a corner somewhere. If I had found that months ago, I would have felt better about this a long time ago. That article helps us understand the things that they presented yesterday in the bottom bullet. And I think, Julie, you put the link in starting right at that content type section. Right?
I did. Yep.
And I would, if you use content types at all, I would highly recommend that you watch that section. I think it's probably 20 minutes or something. Would be really good too.
It's like 10 actually.
Yeah,
it's very fast.
Cool. Hopefully we hit all the questions that were in the chat. I think we may have.
Go to the last slide just so we can share.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're speaking soon.
Yep. So Derek and I are in Seattle for the 365 EduCon. There is a discount code, Phil, for some praxis. You guys are at Ceph and Thrive. And then
Ceph is in Stockholm, Thrive is in Slovenia, so please come and join us.
And then 2 weeks, the Microsoft 365 conference recap from those three that were there. So yippee. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you. In a couple of weeks.